If you break your arm, standard medicine offers a deeply comforting narrative. An X-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor acts as the mechanic, and the broken gear is swapped out or set in place. For decades, we have treated the human mind the exact same way. We assume it is an isolated, sealed box, and that psychological suffering is simply a localized malfunction waiting to be repaired by a clinician observing safely from the outside. This side-by-side comparison illustrates where that assumption fractures. The isolated brain model collapses when you map genuine human transformation. Meaning doesn't happen in a vacuum inside your skull. It emerges through a vast web of relational tethers, what the text calls a person-in-field ontology. Look at the text block anchored next to this geometric spiral. This map was not drafted by a researcher taking notes behind two-way glass. It was drawn by someone who survived the failure modes from the inside. First-person lived experience is hard clinical data. This forces us to abandon the myth of spontaneous insight. True psychological emergence never arrives as a moral reward for simply trying harder. When a clinician applies standard linear pressure to a highly volatile, non-linear human field, the result is rarely healing. The result is structural fragmentation. Here is the exact mathematical architecture of that change, the emergence equation. The equation operates on strict multiplicative logic. If the capacity for ground or reflection drops to zero, the final output collapses. Transformation becomes mathematically impossible. This leftmost panel captures the most dangerous failure mode in modern therapy. You force a massive influx of novel difference onto a system that lacks the structural ground to hold it. The mind doesn't adapt to the perturbation, it shatters under the weight. Standard psychology treats all trauma and stress as a single, continuous sliding scale. Taking a challenging pottery class and surviving a house fire are treated as varying quantities of the exact same material. The lattice rejects this completely. Difference is qualitative. Successful clinical work lives or dies right here. You must precisely identify the specific quality of difference a patient is encountering and strictly match it to their current holding capacity. Look at the contrast in this topology chart. On the left, ordinary perturbation is a manageable wave. On the right, Orphic difference represents a violent topological descent. It maps the movement from embodied presence down into the highly charged void of inverse presence. If a well-meaning clinician demands that a patient verbally process this Orphic void before their physiological ground is rock solid, they commit the error of premature elaboration. They don't facilitate healing. The intervention itself becomes the mechanism of collapse. This diagram frames waking consciousness as a tunable aperture. Pathological states are simply mechanical configurations of this valve, jammed open or shut. Panning down reveals corrigibility, the structural capacity to venture into extreme human experience while maintaining a reliable tether back to the shared world. When a patient is swallowed by profound grief or altered states, the primary objective is never to force the aperture closed. The true objective is to aggressively protect that tether, ensuring their deep exploration remains anchored. The emergence stays banked. Because emergence is strictly conditional and happens across a massive interconnected field, the traditional identity of the therapist is completely stripped back. They cannot function as the heroic mechanic. The center of this posture diagram redefines the role entirely. It is the midwifery of emergence. The practitioner does not manufacture the change. They curate the environment, manage the safety, and modulate the conditions that allow the biological process to unfold on its own. This requires immense restraint. The absolute highest form of clinical skill is often possessing the iron discipline to simply wait. You hold the perimeter. You resist the urge to forcefully intervene just to soothe your own anxiety as the practitioner. You also have to track the unquantifiable variable of the harmonic coefficient. This is the raw energetic resonance, the exact flavor of interaction the clinician brings into the therapeutic space, which forces us to ask, is the generative resonance required to midwife another human being through the Orphic void a teachable medical protocol, or is it an intrinsic, embodied capacity, earned only by those who have successfully navigated their own descent into the void. The modern self-improvement industry sells a deeply comforting lie. They promise a final arrival, a developmental plateau where your trauma is permanently resolved, your triggers are neutralized, and you can finally coast. Notice the altitude axis on this 3D model. The actual geometry of a healthy mind is spiral. It requires the continuity of a recognizable structure while simultaneously demanding you occupy new altitude with every single cycle of change. Step 4 in this schematic illustrates the phase of crystallization. You undergo the chaotic cascade of emergence, the internal structure settles, and you feel a profound sense of capability. It feels like an endpoint, but it is only a temporary stabilization phase. That newly strengthened ground exists for exactly one purpose: to give your biological system the expanded capacity to survive and metabolize the next inevitable loop of difference. The text leaves us with a stark instruction. The spiral lattice is not a decorative academic theory for you to passively consume. It is a highly demanding field that responds to the exact conditions you bring to it: seeds on the wind, recognition when ready.